what do you think is the purpose of American foreign policy towards Bulgaria?
Same as everywhere else, to ensure subordination to U.S. interests and policy goals. Actually, the United States is not unique in this respect. Bulgaria would have the same policy if it were powerful enough. Every state wants others to be subordinate to its interests. The difference is that the United States has absolutely overwhelming power. 1945, the U.S. took over the mantle of global domination from Britain, but with a far greater scope. Britain was powerful, but nothing like the United States. In fact, back to the 19th century, the U.S. was richer than all the countries of Europe combined. Wasn't a major actor in world affairs, but it was enormously wealthy, has overwhelming natural and other advantages. Nothing like it in human history. Just take a look at the military dimension. Overwhelms the rest of the world combined, has internal natural resources, homogeneous population. So when the United States became the global leader, it did carry out very sophisticated planning. It's worth reading. Late 1940s, the State Department policy planning staff headed by George Kennan assigned to every region of the world what they called its function within the U.S.-dominated system. Very careful, very sophisticated planning. Natural, that's the way a world dominant power behaves. And when you look at it, it's pretty chilling, but it was mostly carried out often by violence and aggression, subversion, case after case. Yes, Britain acted the same way. France acted the same way. Germany did within its smaller imperial domains. That's the way great powers operate. The United States is different because of its extraordinary power and its deep subordination of the intellectual class to state policy. Criticism is not allowed. You can see it. It's dramatic when you look at it. So, for example, Paul Krugman, one of the critics, left critics, this morning in the New York Times, writes about how he opposed the Iraq War. He made the mistake of linking to his column his opposition to the Iraq War was it would be harmful to the United States. If we hear that from Moscow, do we call it a criticism of the Ukraine invasion? That's called criticism. It's about as far as you can go. And Barack Obama is praised for having called the Iraq War a strategic blunder. He was imitating Russian generals in the early 80s who said the invasion of Afghanistan is a strategic blunder. Do we praise them for that? That's called criticism in the United States. Try to go 1 millimeter beyond that, and you're bitterly condemned and denounced. It's a free country. You're not thrown into jail. Like right now, no police are going to come into this room and arrest me and take me to jail. That doesn't happen. Sometimes it does, but not mostly. So it's a very free country, maybe the most free in the world, but very subordinate to power. Yeah. That's a crucial part of imperial domination. You don't want to have criticism from within. The intellectual classes are very dedicated overwhelmingly to this. So the United States is not different in nature from other imperial powers. It's different in scale. And with regard to Bulgaria, wants it to be part of the system.
In Bulgaria, many people feel that the United States is behaving like the early Soviet Union, but without the economic help. Your comment?
Well, the United States is a very free country, though. Mark Twain, the greatest American novelist, once said that the United States has 3 precious gifts: freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, and the good sense not to exercise either of them.
Yeah.
That's basically correct. Censorship, self-censorship, goes way back. Also state censorship. In times of crisis, there's been severe state censorship. But the case after, let's just take the Iraq war, 20 years since the U.S. invaded Iraq. See if you can find one sentence, not asking much, one sentence anywhere near the mainstream that says the Iraq war was the supreme international crime of aggression, just like the Ukraine war. One sentence. You won't. Is that censorship? Well, it's not coming by state orders. It's coming from subordination to power, what Mark Twain called the good sense not to exercise freedom of speech. Actually, George Orwell discussed this in an essay which was suppressed. You've all read Animal Farm. Probably haven't read the introduction to Animal Farm because it was suppressed. In the introduction to Animal Farm, Orwell addresses the people of England. He said, this book is a satire about the totalitarian enemy, but in England, we shouldn't feel so self-righteous because in free England, unpopular ideas can be suppressed without the use of force. And discussed it a little bit. One of the methods that he described is just subordination to the prevailing culture. You go to the best colleges, you get a good education, you have instilled into you the understanding that there are certain things it just wouldn't do to say, like that the U.S. invaded Iraq and destroyed it in the Criminal Act. No, the U.S. liberated Iraq. You just learn you're not supposed to say that. And there's literally no deviation in the mainstream. Well, is that censorship? Not really. No orders are coming from anywhere. It's what Orwell described. Good education.
Here in Bulgaria, there is a chain of American organizations that affect political process in Bulgaria. These organizations are doing their best to prove a Russian danger. How do you assess the Russian threat in the Balkans?
And look back and see if there's one phrase anywhere in Russian pronouncements indicating any threat to the Balkans. The Russians have been very explicit and clear about this, and high-level U.S. diplomats agree with them, repeat the same thing. They opposed the expansion of NATO, of course. Yeltsin, Gorbachev, Medvedev, Putin all opposed it. They opposed it but didn't do anything about it. 2008, George Bush, the second George Bush, invited Ukraine into NATO. Germany and France objected, but U.S. power prevailed. Decision was made to allow Ukraine to enter into NATO, not now, but prepare for it. At that point, Russia really objected strongly. Russian red lines, explicit red lines, were not Ukraine, not Georgia. Too dangerous for our security for pretty obvious reasons, I don't have to tell you. Every top-level U.S. diplomat understood this. Head of the CIA, William Burns, former ambassador to Russia, Russia specialist, he informed Washington that every Russian he had met across the spectrum, strongest critics of the Kremlin, all agreed that if the United States moves to incorporate Ukraine and Georgia into its military alliance, Russia will have to react. Couldn't find an exception to this. Every other high-level diplomat has said the same thing. That started in 2008 with the integration of Ukrainian forces into NATO, interoperability, weapons training, military maneuvers, and so on. It's all a very serious security threat to Russia. Everyone understood this. This in no way justifies the invasion. But if you want to understand it, you better. Is there a Russian threat to the Balkans? As a consequence of these actions, maybe. But there was none before. There's a lot of people like to quote a comment of Putin's about how the collapse of the fall of the Soviet Union was a tragedy. The very few quote his next sentence. Says anyone who tries to reconstitute it is out of his mind. No threat has been suggested against the Balkans, against Sweden, against Finland, just Ukraine, Georgia. Very clear and explicit up to the outbreak of the war. Now, if the war continues, there may well be threats. Well-known East European historian, British, Richard Sakwa, a very good historian, wrote that NATO these days exists primarily to deal with the threats caused by its existence. There's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah. We have our paradox. How can we cooperate? We want to cooperate with the American liberators of yesterday who are pushing us towards serious conflict. How can we cooperate if we'll have a conflict in the time?
Well, I think the thing to do is to cooperate with those forces within the United States that are looking for a world of peace, cooperation, accommodation. There are peace forces, and people-to-people interaction and communication on all sides can press the wrong governments towards moving towards a world of accommodation. There's something we should think about in the background. The whole human species, all of us, are facing a very serious crisis. Has never arisen in human history. The environmental crisis. You don't deal with it, we're finished. Either the great powers will accommodate, work together to deal with this crisis, or they will all sink together. It's very simple. When the United States, take a look at the United States official policy, I'm quoting it, block innovation in China. What are they blocking? China is plenty of criticisms you can make about China, a lot of rotten things. But one of the things they're doing is leading the world far ahead of the rest of the world in renewable energy. China established more solar panels just last year, than the rest of the world combined. It's way ahead in electrification. It's more advanced in development of new batteries. But we have to stop that. We have to prevent their innovation in the means for saving humanity from that. Happens to be official policy, not only to do it, but to enlist Europe in this. This is saying, let's race to the precipice and commit suicide. Unless that's reversed, we're finished. Pretty much the same is true in Europe. If Europe is Western Europe, if it's not going into permanent decline, it will have to accommodate with the great resource centers and markets to its east. Not only Russia, but the whole Eurasia region that's being developed by China, huge China market. It's got to do that, or else it just declines. Meanwhile, the world hurtles to self-destruction. These are not small issues. Survival of organized human life, even not mentioning the threat of nuclear war, which will wipe us all out. Well, those are not trivial matters. And the way to deal with them is by people of the world working together to develop constructive initiatives and to compel their governments to stop working to destroy us all.
Yeah. Do you think, are there nations where democracy does not work?
It's a funny notion. There are a lot of ways for democracy not to work. One way, for example, is to ensure what Orwell criticized, that unpopular ideas can be suppressed without the use of force. That undermines democracy. In the world's leading democracies, there are other formal democracies like Hungary, Poland, which are becoming what are called illiberal democracies. You have formal institutions, but crushing of the basic institutional structures in which democracy functions. You have other democracies where a foreign government, always the United States, moves in to overthrow the democratic government and install a dictatorship, case after case. Even recently, take 2009, it's not that far back, the government of Honduras, which has been a U.S. colony forever, the president moved towards a mildly reformist program. It was overthrown by a military coup. All of Latin America protested against it. The United States supported it, refused to call it a military coup because they wanted to keep sending arms to the military junta. That's Obama and Clinton. The military government ran a fraudulent election, condemned all through Latin America. U.S. praised it as a wonderful step towards democracy. That's been going on forever. Well, and as I say, the United States is not unique in this respect. Britain, France, Germany, other countries in their own domains acted the same way. The difference is scale. U.S. is nothing like U.S. power in history.
What's the American mistake right now? The American hubris?
The American mistake?
Yeah.
Well,
the
mistake is a word. What the U.S. regards as a victory, an achievement, is, in my view, a mistake. So if fossil fuel industries and military industries have such huge profits that they don't know what to do with it, that's called an achievement in the United States. Not in my view. That's a mistake. What's a mistake is in the eye of the beholder. The U.S. opening new pipelines, fossil fuel fields for development. From the point of view of the power system, that's an achievement, not in my point of view. So if the United States, take what I mentioned before, when the World Trade Organization seeks to determine whether U.S. murderous sanctions on Cuba are legal, the United States pulled out. Well, here that's called an achievement. I'd call it the International Criminal Court, the world courts, determined that the U.S. was stealing Iranian assets. U.S. told them, get lost, none of your business. Is that an achievement or a mistake?
Yeah.
Well, depends how you look at it. Can go on like that.
It's a very funny question. Why your Democrats are looking more and more like our ex-communists?
In what respect are they acting like ex-communists?
Because of gender politics, for example. Because of
gender politics?
Yeah. This is like stupidity of our ex-communists. Stupidity.
You have to be a little bit careful here. What's called woke, the gender politics, most of it is very positive. It's calling for the rights of oppressed, suffering people. Sometimes it goes way too far, and the excesses are what are focused on by the reactionary elements. They say, look at these terrible excesses, and they're there. But the major part is quite humane, and I think should be supported, like gays and lesbians. No reason why they shouldn't be treated like other people. Fine, none of our business. Somebody says, or same with transgender people. Somebody says, I feel like I have male sex organs, but I feel I want to act like a woman. None of my business. Let him do what he wants. He wants to wear a dress, his business. That part is good. It can be extended to the point where it becomes excessive and harmful. Anything can. And it's the excessive, harmful fringe that is the focus of right-wing propaganda. We have to, so yes, there is what you described, but it's based on an extension of something that's good and right and should be supported. So I think we have to be somewhat careful in dealing with this.
What is happening in America with one word?
What's happening in America is it's destroying itself. The United States has no real enemies. It has overwhelming security, nothing like it.
Yeah.
Controls the Western Hemisphere, both oceans, opposite sides of both oceans, overwhelms the rest of the world combined in military forces, 800 military bases, military forces operating, no security problems. It's tearing itself apart. It's wrecking itself. And it may destroy itself. Right now, it's mostly the Republican Party. Republican Party is no longer a parliamentary party in the traditional sense. If you look at international comparisons, which have been done, attitudes line up pretty much with the right-wing fringe parties in Europe, many with neo-Nazi origin. We see this very clearly. So you may recall a couple months ago in Hungary, Viktor Orban called a conference of the far-right parties and movements in Europe. The star participant was the core of the Republican Party, Conservative Political Action Caucus, basically the Republican Party. The lead speaker was President Trump. The lead television personality, Tucker Carlson, produced an ode to Orban as leading the world towards the right form of Christian nationalism and so on. A couple months later, the Conservative Political Action Caucus had its own conference in Dallas. Who was the keynote speaker? Viktor Orban. That's the Republican Party. Wants to create a party on the model of Orban's destruction of democracy. It's appealing to undercurrents that are there. Every country has ugly currents underground, and the Republican Party's tapping those currents. Racism, white nationalism, guns, misogyny, and for perfectly intelligible reasons. The Republican Party is devoted obsequiously to the very rich and the corporate sector, and you can't get votes that way. You can't go to the public and say, I want to destroy you and enrich the rich. Not a way to get votes. So what you have to do is change the subject. Don't talk about your policies. Never talk about the policies. Talk about what are called cultural issues. Abortion, guns, books in the schools that you don't want children to read, anything but the policies. Take a look at Trump. His one legislative achievement, was a huge tax cut for the rich and the corporations, stabbing everyone else in the back. But you don't talk about that. What you talk about is what's called the Great Replacement. The Democrats are trying to bring illegal immigrants into the country to destroy the white race. Let's talk about that. 50% of Republicans, virtually half, think that the Democratic Party is run by sadistic pedophiles who are training children to be sex perverts. Well, that makes good sense for the Republican propagandists. Don't talk about the policies. Let's make up these stories. And there's a time of decline. There's a serious decline, remember. We've been through 40 years of neoliberalism, and it's had a very severe toll everywhere in the world, but in the United States, it's studied very carefully. During these 50 years, the transfer of wealth from the working class and the middle class to the top 1% is estimated at $50 trillion. Wages have stagnated, social services have declined, unions have been destroyed, means of defense, health system is a disaster. People are suffering for the benefit of the super rich. It leads to a society with plenty of resentment, anger, easy, perfect terrain for some demagogue to come in and say, the problem is the Democrats are bringing in illegal immigrants to destroy the white race. Okay, let's talk about that. Not new. You've had enough of that in European history. I don't have to give you examples.
Can I ask you a personal question? Is there pressure of Chomsky because of his opinion?
Let me stress, it's a very free country.
Yeah.
So police are not going to come in and arrest me.
Yes, but
is there pressure? It's enormous. Bitter condemnations, lies, defamation, all through the mainstream. Okay. That's pressure if you want, but it comes with being a critic. All through history is the same. Try to find a country in history where critics of power were respected and honored. Try to find one. Doesn't exist. There are always, it goes way back to classical Greece. Who had to get Socrates? Because he was corrupting the youth of Athens by asking too many questions. Go back to the Bible. There were what we now call dissidents, criticizing the king, calling for mercy for widows and orphans. Now they're honored, called the prophets, not then. Then they were driven into the desert, imprisoned. The most evil character in the Bible, King Ahab, called the prophet Elijah to him, condemned him as a hater of Israel because he was criticizing the evil king. All through history. Yes, that's the pattern. In more brutal, harsh countries, you get sent to the gulag. In even worse countries, like the U.S. colonies, you get your head blown off. Okay, El Salvador, for example. But you're never treated nicely.
Yeah. I want to say a big thank you for these answers and wish you to be healthy, Mr. Chomsky.
Thank you.
How old are you now?
I'll soon be 95. I have a bigger beard than you do.
Yeah, be healthy more and more years. That's my wish. You don't remember, but I make with you one interview before 10 years for a standard newspaper in Bulgaria.
I don't remember. So many, I can't keep them straight.
Thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Thank you. A pleasure to be with you.